My daughter called me on a Tuesday afternoon, which should have been normal. She called every Tuesday, same time, same cheerful voice, asking how my knee was doing and whether I'd been eating enough vegetables. That Tuesday was different. She didn't ask about my knee. "Dad," she said, and there was something tight in her voice, something I hadn't heard since her mother passed. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't react. Just listen." I was standing in my garage, halfway through rebuilding a '67 Mustang carburetor that had been sitting on my workbench for 3 weeks. I set down the float valve. "I'm listening. Tonight, when you go to bed, I need you to lock your bedroom door. Put the chain on. Don't open it for anyone except me, and I won't be there tonight." She paused. "And Dad, don't tell Nathan." "Nathan, my son-in-law. My younger daughter Brenda's husband of 4 years, who'd been living in my house for the past 8 months while they got back on their feet." "Rebecca," I said slowly, "you're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. Just do it. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Please, Dad." I stood there in my garage, grease on my hands, the smell of motor oil in the air, and felt something I hadn't felt since my last year on the job, the particular cold certainty that something was very wrong. I put the chain on my door that night. Let me back up because none of this makes sense without the full picture, and I owe it to myself to tell it straight. My name is Earl Hutchins. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a highway patrol officer in Central Ohio before my right knee decided it had enough of cruisers and concrete and retired me 2 years ahead of schedule. I have two daughters. Rebecca is 38, works as a forensic accountant in Columbus. Brenda is 34, works or used to work part-time at a nail salon in Dayton. My wife Carol passed 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. After that it was just me, the house in Marysville we'd bought in 1994, and the Mustang I'd been slowly restoring in the garage because it gave me somewhere to put my hands when my head got too loud. I'm not a complicated man. I kept the house clean. I paid my bills. My pension plus Social Security came to just under $4,200 a month, which was more than enough in Marysville if you weren't stupid about it. Carol and I had saved carefully for 30 years. The house was paid off. There was a CD at Huntington Bank with $67,000 in it, a brokerage account with a little over $190,000, and a savings account I thought of as the rainy day fund dollars, $43,000 sitting quietly earning almost nothing, but there if I needed it. I didn't need it. I was fine. That was before Brenda called me crying at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night, telling me Nathan had lost his job and they were 2 months behind on their apartment, and could they please, just for a few months, come stay with me. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my daughter. They moved in on a Saturday in March. Nathan drove the U-Haul. He was a big man, Nathan, wide shoulders, easy smile, the kind of handshake that wanted you to know he was confident. He'd worked in sales, he said, between opportunities right now, but he had leads, good leads. He was optimistic. I shook his hand and showed him where the spare key hung. I should not have shown him where the spare key hung. The first few weeks were fine. Brenda cooked dinner sometimes. Nathan fixed a gutter that had been sagging since October. I thought, this is manageable. Families do this. People help each other. Then the small things started. Nathan began sitting with me when I paid bills online. Just keeping me company, he said. He'd ask questions. Casual questions. What bank is your checking at? Do you use the same login for your investment account? My buddy's dad got scammed last year. You should really set up two-factor on everything. Want me to help you with that? I let him set up two-factor on my email. It seemed responsible. He asked if he could borrow my truck one afternoon when his car was in the shop. Fine. He borrowed it 3 more times before his car was supposedly fixed. Brenda started talking about how the house was a lot for one person to manage. Had I thought about simplifying? Some of their friends' parents had moved to retirement communities and loved it. Not that she was pushing anything, just, something to think about. I mentioned it to Rebecca on one of our Tuesday calls. She went quiet in a way that worried me. How long has Brenda been saying things like that? I don't know. A few weeks. And Nathan, how involved is he in your finances? He set up my two-factor. He just watches sometimes when I'm on the computer. Another silence. Okay, Dad, I'm going to come visit in a few weeks. Just a normal visit. Don't make a big deal of it. She came. She was friendly with Brenda and polite with Nathan. She and I watched the Indians game together on Sunday night, and she didn't say anything alarming. When she left Monday morning, she hugged me a little longer than usual. 2 months later, she called on a Tuesday with that tight voice and told me to lock my door and not tell Nathan. I did what she asked. I lay in my bed that night, listening to my own house, which is a strange thing when you've lived somewhere for 30 years. The refrigerator hum, the central air clicking on, footsteps down the hall. Nathan, I thought, going to the kitchen. At 11:40 at night, I heard him on the phone. Not words, just the low murmur of a voice. It went on for about 15 minutes. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things I should have noticed. Rebecca called at 7 the next morning. Meet me at the Bob Evans on 36. Don't tell Brenda where you're going. She was already in a booth when I got there, her laptop open, a legal pad covered in her handwriting. She'd ordered me coffee. She knew how I take it. Sit down, Dad. I sat. I need you to understand that I've been careful about this. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. She turned the laptop toward me. Nathan is not who he says he is. She'd been running a quiet background check since her visit. Rebecca has access to financial records in her work that most people don't. What she found made the coffee taste like ash. Nathan had 2 prior names on file, not legal name changes, just aliases. He'd been involved in 2 elder financial exploitation cases in Pennsylvania and Kentucky, both civil, both settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. He had a connection to a man in Pittsburgh who ran what investigators called a vulnerability network. People who identified elderly homeowners with significant assets and moved in, literally or figuratively, to extract them. He knows about your accounts, Rebecca said quietly, specifically the brokerage account and the CD. I think he got your login information when he set up your email. I looked at my coffee cup. How do you know that? Because 3 weeks ago someone accessed your brokerage account from a device that wasn't yours. The access originated from your IP address. She paused. Your home Wi-Fi. I thought about Nathan sitting next to me at the kitchen table, helpful, cheerful, just keeping me company. He hasn't moved any money, she said quickly. I was monitoring, he's been looking. Account balances, beneficiary designations, transfer limits. Beneficiary designations, I repeated. Dad. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. I think they'd been waiting until they had a plan in place, a complete plan. What kind of plan? What kind of plan? She took a breath. I found paperwork. It's a conservatorship filing. Nathan had a lawyer in Franklin County prepare it. They were going to claim you showed signs of cognitive decline. They had a doctor lined up, someone who does paid evaluations. If they got conservatorship, they'd control your assets, your medical decisions, everything. The diner was loud around us. A family at the next table. Somebody's kid complaining about pancakes. Normal Tuesday morning in Ohio. Brenda, I said. It wasn't a question. I don't know how much she knows. Rebecca's voice was careful. I think Nathan is driving this, but I've seen the paperwork, Dad. Both their names are on the filing as proposed co-conservators. I thought about my daughter, my younger one, who I'd taught to ride a bike in this same town, who'd called me crying after every breakup in her 20s, who cried at her mother's grave for 45 minutes and held my hand the whole time. Okay, I said. I was surprised by how steady my voice was. What do we do? Rebecca had already called a lawyer. Her college roommate's father, a man named Gerald Ashworth, who specialized in elder law and had an office in Dublin, Ohio. We met him that same afternoon. Gerald was 71 years old, silver-haired, and had the precise manner of someone who had seen this exact situation many times before and was no longer surprised by it. He shook my hand and looked me in the eye and said, Mr. Hutchins, you are not the first, and you won't be the last, but I've got very good news for you. You came to us before anything was finalized. That matters enormously. He explained the conservatorship process. In Ohio, someone claiming cognitive incapacity on another person's behalf has to go through probate court. It takes time. There are hearings, there are evaluations, and crucially, the person being petitioned has the right to their own counsel. They haven't filed yet, Gerald said, reviewing the documents Rebecca had found. They were still dotting I's, but they were close. He looked at me over his glasses. First thing Monday morning, we're going to file a counterprotective declaration with probate court, essentially a preemptive record establishing that you are cognitively competent and have not requested any conservatorship assistance. We'll also get a voluntary cognitive evaluation from a neuropsychologist of your choosing. And in the meantime, we freeze your brokerage account and CD to any non-routine access, add a verbal confirmation requirement to your bank accounts, and change every password with no assistance from anyone in your household. He said it exactly like that. Anyone in your household. Professional and precise. I drove home that afternoon and smiled at Nathan across the kitchen when he asked where I'd been. Physical therapy for the knee, I said. You know how it is. He said he was sorry to hear I was still having trouble with it. Very sympathetic. I changed the locks the following Saturday while Nathan and Brenda were at the farmer's market. I told him the old deadbolt had been sticking. Not untrue, it had been sticking for 2 years. The new locksmith came out. I got 2 keys. I gave one to Rebecca and kept one in my wallet. I did not give Nathan a key. He noticed. He didn't say anything directly, but I saw his eyes go to the new hardware when he came in through the front door that afternoon. He smiled. He made dinner that night. Lasagna, my favorite. I ate 2 servings and complimented his cooking and thought about 31 years of reading people across the roof of a patrol car. Gerald filed the protective declaration on Monday. Rebecca flew in from Columbus on Wednesday, and the 3 of us met with a forensic accountant, a colleague of hers, to fully document the state of my assets. Everything photographed, time-stamped, recorded. Gerald also contacted the Adult Protective Services Unit through a colleague at the county prosecutor's office. Not a formal complaint yet, he said. Just flagging. Just creating a record. 2 weeks later, Nathan came to me in the garage while I was working on the Mustang. Hey, Earl. He almost always called me Earl rather than anything else. Never Dad, which I'd noticed and filed away. I wanted to talk to you about something. Just the 2 of us. I set down my wrench. Sure. He sat on the metal stool by the workbench, easy and relaxed. I've been worried about you. Brenda has too. You seemed more forgetful lately. We both noticed. Last week you left the stove on twice. I hadn't left the stove on, not once. We care about you, he said, and we want to make sure you're protected. There are some options, legal options, that could give us all peace of mind. Just make sure things are handled right if something ever happened. He was watching my face, testing for the reaction. I picked up the wrench. I appreciate that, Nathan. Let me think about it, of course. He smiled. No rush. He went back inside. I waited until I heard the door close, then I took the small digital recorder out of my shirt pocket and turned it off. Gerald had given it to me. I've been carrying it for 11 days. It took another 3 weeks for everything to come together. Gerald, working with Rebecca's forensic contact in the county prosecutor's office, quietly built a case that went well beyond Nathan and Brenda. Nathan's connection to the Pittsburgh network, the same man Rebecca had found, turned out to be active. The investigator on the APS referral had seen this fingerprint before. Other families in central Ohio, an 82-year-old woman in Worthington who'd signed over power of attorney after a sustained isolation campaign, a 77-year-old retired teacher in Westerville who'd moved to a better living situation and found his investment accounts drained 6 months later. Nathan wasn't just a bad son-in-law. He was part of something organized. When the investigators moved, they moved fast. On a Thursday morning, 2 detectives from the county prosecutor's financial crimes unit knocked on my door. Nathan answered, which surprised him. He expected me to answer. He didn't know that I'd moved to Rebecca's apartment in Columbus 4 days earlier, quietly, 1 bag at a time, telling Nathan and Brenda I was having the carpets cleaned. I heard it all from Rebecca later. She'd gotten a call from Gerald while it was happening. They arrested Nathan on the spot. Conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of an elderly adult, an Ohio felony, F3 level. The Pittsburgh connection made it worse. Federal wire fraud charges were discussed. His lawyer would spend the next several months trying to argue down from the federal exposure. Brenda was not arrested. The investigators interviewed her twice. Her phone record showed she'd been present for conversations about the conservatorship plan, but the key decisions, the financial probing, The network contact. Those were Nathan. Her lawyer argued she'd been manipulated. The prosecutors ultimately agreed, conditional on her full cooperation and testimony. She called me 3 days after Nathan's arrest. I saw her name on my phone and sat with it for a long moment before I answered. Dad. Her voice was barely there. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet, I told her. I didn't know it was this. I didn't know about the other people. I swear I didn't know about the other families. I thought it was just Nathan said it was to protect you. I thought it was just Nathan said it was to protect you. I thought, Brenda. I kept my voice level. He was using you to get to me, and you let him because you wanted to believe whatever he was telling you. She cried for a while. I waited. Is there anything I can do? She finally asked. Cooperate with every investigator who contacts you, I said. Be completely honest. Pay your own lawyer, get a job, and stop waiting for someone else to solve your problems. That's what you can do. She said okay. She said she loved me. I know you do, I said. I love you too, Brenda. But love doesn't mean I forget what almost happened. The legal process was slow, the way these things always are. Nathan's lawyer negotiated for months. The federal wire fraud charge was reduced in exchange for his cooperation identifying other members of the Pittsburgh operation. He pleaded to the state felony in Ohio, conspiracy to commit financial exploitation, and received 4 years in prison, minimum 34 months before parole eligibility. He was also ordered to pay restitution to the victims identified in the broader case, a number that would take years to work through. Gerald filed a civil suit on my behalf. The damages were documented carefully: the unauthorized access to my brokerage account, the preparatory steps toward the conservatorship, the emotional distress campaign, the cognitive decline they'd planned to claim. At mediation, Nathan's insurance carrier, he had a homeowner's policy that covered certain personal liability claims, settled for $38,000. It wasn't everything. Gerald said it was the fastest resolution he'd seen on a case like this. I took the check and put it in the rainy day fund account, which I'd renamed in my head. Not a rainy day fund anymore, a proof of survival fund. The civil matter with Brenda was something Gerald and I discussed carefully. She hadn't profited directly. Her name on the conservatorship filing was the most damning thing, but she hadn't been the architect. Gerald advised against suing her. You could, he said, but you'd be suing someone who has no assets and who is actively cooperating with prosecutors. The practical return is minimal. The personal cost to you could be significant. I agreed. I didn't sue my daughter. I did not, however, invite her to my new address. I found the apartment in late October, about 2 miles from Rebecca's place in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus. First floor, 2 bedrooms, one for sleeping, one for the workshop I slowly rebuilt from scratch. I hired movers for the heavy furniture. Rebecca helped me pack the kitchen. My older daughter, standing in Carol's kitchen that I'd eaten breakfast in for 30 years, carefully wrapping dishes in newspaper. You doing okay, Dad? Getting there. She looked up at me. She had her mother's eyes. She always had her mother's eyes. You know this was the right call. Moving. Starting over. I know, I said, and I did. But right doesn't mean it doesn't ache. I let the movers take the last box out and stood in the empty living room for a minute. 30 years of ordinary life. Carol teaching Brenda to read on that floor. Rebecca's high school graduation party in that backyard. First cup of coffee every morning for 3 decades at that kitchen table. I locked up, left the key with the realtor, and didn't look back when I drove away. A young couple from Delaware County bought the house. They had a dog and a baby on the way. The husband was going to use the garage for woodworking. I shook his hand at closing and told him the furnace ran a little loud in January but was reliable. He said they'd take good care of it. I believed him. In my new workshop, I have 12 pieces in rotation. I'm not as ambitious as I used to be. The Mustang I sold before the move, which still stings a little, but an apartment doesn't have a garage and I had to choose. What I kept was the small stuff. A Seth Thomas mantel clock from 1908. A Hamilton Railroad watch that needed a complete movement service. A Vienna regulator that a woman brought to me from an estate sale, convinced it was beyond repair. It wasn't. Nothing worth keeping is beyond repair. I volunteer 2 afternoons a week at a senior center on 5th Avenue, teaching a workshop on basic watch maintenance. 6 regulars ranging from 68 to 83. One of them, a retired electrician named Frank, has better hands than I do. We argue about the correct way to hold a mainspring. It's the best part of my week. Rebecca comes by on Sundays. We watch football when it's the season, baseball when it's not, and eat whatever she brings, which is usually something from a Thai place she likes on High Street. We don't talk about Nathan every week. We talk about other things. Turns out I have a lot to say about a lot of things, and so does she. Brenda has been sending letters. Not emails, actual letters, handwritten the way Carol taught her. She's working as a medical receptionist in Dayton. She has a different apartment, a smaller one, pays her own rent. She mentioned in the third letter that she'd started going to church again. In the fourth letter, she said her therapist thought she was making real progress. In the fifth letter, she asked if she could come visit. I put that letter on the workbench next to the Vienna regulator and looked at it for a while. Not yet, I wrote back. But I'm not saying never. It wasn't forgiveness. I'm not sure what to call it. Maybe just accuracy. Being accurate about what's possible and what isn't, and leaving a door open that I'm not ready to walk through yet. Nathan is serving his sentence at a state facility in Chillicothe. His federal cooperation agreement saved him from the additional time, but he's still going to be 47 years old when he gets out, with a felony record, owing restitution he'll never fully pay. I don't think about him much. He was a criminal who targeted my family, and criminals have consequences. The calculation is simple. The harder thing is Brenda. That calculation isn't simple at all. Someone asked me once, a woman in my watch workshop, sharp woman, used to be an accountant. She asked how I could still love someone who'd been willing to do that to me, even passively, even by looking away. I thought about it for a moment. I was fitting a new crystal into a pocket watch case, and I held it up to the light before I answered. The love doesn't disappear, I said. It just doesn't override everything else anymore. You can love someone and still require them to earn back your trust. Those two things can both be true at the same time. She nodded. Said that sounded hard. It is, I said, but so is most of what matters. Last week I finished the Vienna regulator. Took me 4 months longer than I expected because the pendulum suspension spring was a custom size and I had to source it from a clock part supplier in Pennsylvania. When it finally arrived, the installation took 11 minutes. I wound the clock, set the pendulum swinging, and listened. Perfect beat. Steady and even. I hung it on the wall across from my workbench where I can see it while I work. Every time I look up, it's measuring time exactly the way it's supposed to, the way it was built to, 100 and some years ago, before anyone thought to give up on it. There are 64 years behind me. However many ahead are mine to decide what to do with. I have a Seth Thomas waiting on the bench. I have Sunday with Rebecca in 4 days. I have 6 people on Wednesday who want to argue with me about mainsprings. I have my life, still mine. That's more than enough to start with. People ask me sometimes what the hardest part was. They expect me to say the arrest or the courtroom or finding out that my own son-in-law had been logging into my accounts at night while I slept 20 feet away. Those things were hard, but the hardest part was something quieter than any of that. The hardest part was opening the door for Brenda the day she moved in and thinking, this is what families do. This is what it looks like to love people. I was right about that, actually. It is what it looks like. The problem is that love without clear eyes isn't really protection. It's just exposure dressed up to feel warm. I spent 31 years on the highway patrol learning to read situations before they turned dangerous. I could spot a driver about to make a bad decision at 75 miles an hour. But I let a man I barely knew set up access to my email because he used words like protect and peace of mind. And I wanted to believe that someone looking at me and using those words meant what they said. That's not stupidity. I want to be honest about that, because I spent a few months thinking it was. What it actually was is this. I was grieving. Carol had been gone 6 years, but grief doesn't follow a schedule, and some part of me still wanted the house to feel full. When Brenda called crying, I didn't just hear my daughter asking for help. I heard an opportunity to be needed again. Nathan understood that. He found the door I'd left open inside myself and walked right through it. The thing about consequence is that it doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care that Nathan was charming, or that Brenda believed what he told her, or that I wanted to be a good father. Consequence follows action, and the action here was a man systematically working to strip an old cop of everything he built, and getting close enough to do it that only Rebecca's precision and stubbornness stopped it from happening. Actions that specific produce consequences that specific. Nathan is sitting in Chillicothe right now, and that is not luck or cruelty. It is arithmetic. What I carry from all of this, what I'd want anyone going through something similar to understand, is that protecting yourself is not the same as closing your heart. Those two things get confused, especially when the people trying to take from you are people you love. I still love Brenda. I said it to her on the phone and I meant it. But I also changed the locks without telling her husband, wore a recorder in my shirt pocket, and moved out of my house one bag at a time so no one could stop me. Both things were true at the same time. Love doesn't require you to be a willing target. The other thing, the one I think matters most, is that I was not saved by luck. I was saved by Rebecca paying close enough attention to notice something was wrong, by Gerald knowing the exact legal mechanism to use before Nathan could file first, by my own 30 years of training that told me to stay calm and gather evidence rather than confront and tip my hand. Intelligence applied with patience. That's what beat a man who thought he'd found an easy mark. The Vienna regulator hangs on my wall now. It took 4 months and a custom part from Pennsylvania and more patience than I thought I had left, but it runs perfectly. It was always worth fixing. So, for the record, am I?